Hello, everyone, and welcome to an overview of Chapter 8, which is about remediating deficits in life skills. So regardless of where in the spectrum the students with autism that you work with fall, there are going to be some life skills components that you'll probably need to work on. So keep that in mind as you go through this chapter, even if you work with students who don't need help with some of those basic daily living skills that the chapter talks about, like toileting and eating and that kind of thing. There are a lot of important components within the broader umbrella of life skills that you'll want to make sure that you're familiar with as you proceed. So pay close attention. So let's get started. The learning objectives for this chapter and this module really are that you would be able to describe assessment strategies that are designed to provide the necessary information you need for determining a functional, individualized life skills curriculum for your students, that you would be able to list various prompting strategies that are recommended for teaching self-help skills to students with autism, that you'd be able to discuss the benefits and challenges of teaching play, leisure, and recreational skills and activities to students with autism. A lot of times that is forgotten in the focus on academics or challenging behaviors, but we do need to work on teaching play and leisure. Also, that you'd be able to describe various types of supports that might be necessary for students with autism in order for them to master vocational skills and to obtain and maintain employment, which is really essential to quality of life and promoting independence for our students, which really should be our ultimate goal. All right, the first part of this chapter talks about assessment. That's typically the format of this textbook. Really, we begin with the assessment of these particular skills because that's where we begin, right? In order to plan next steps, we need to figure out where are our students in these skill areas. So first, you want to determine what it is your students need to learn. Again, using that ecological assessment is really, really important. So you've had some practice and experience with that now. You would use it again here in this area, or in this, it's a lumping of a bunch of different types of skills, really. So you use that ecological assessment for each kind of thing. It's especially useful when figuring out what types of vocational skills the students need to learn as they reach that middle school, high school age, and they start really exploring what they want to do as a career or a job. It would be important for you to do an ecological assessment of that job site in order to figure out what the student needs to learn and what you can help them develop as far as vocational skills go. Inventories are important. These are interest inventories, folks, because you really want to make sure the student is at the center of this process, especially when we're talking about leisure skills. Like, they should be interested in what it is you're trying to make them learn. So use those interest inventories. It's important to do interviews with family, with folks that work with that student a lot, with the student, him or herself, to get an understanding of, pardon me, of their perspective and their abilities, their strengths and weaknesses in all of these areas. Checklists are great. And you'll also want to assess using direct observation, which again, we've been using throughout this semester. It's really one of those basic data collection methods that really can't be overemphasized. So let's start with the ecological assessment. If you reflect back, we've talked about this multiple times, but really it's an opportunity to evaluate the target environment, figure out which activity and skills are needed for the student to be successful there. It's as simple as that. But sometimes we need to pause, take off our background knowledge hats, and try to go into a space with no preconceived notions and figure out what skills are needed in that space. The goal here is for you to develop a comprehensive and individualized curriculum because no student is the same. So you're really going to have some of your students specifically in mind in those when you're doing those assessments. Part of this ecological assessment would be to observe and interview other adults as well as the peers in that environment. You can also ask general educators about their students' leisure and recreation preferences because they may have that, especially if they do take a PE class, perhaps that instructor has some information on what the student's interested in or what they have shown higher interest in during the course. Please, it's important to be aware that many students with autism may not have a lot of interest in what we would consider typical age group activities. In fact, many of them may show high preference for what we would consider to be age inappropriate activities. So your text does a really good job of giving you some ideas of how you could work with a student to try to bring their interest up to more of an age appropriate version. Sometimes you can use different types of materials or to sort of start shaping their interest towards something that would be similar to um, their focus, that is maybe on something that's too young for them, and bring them up to something that would be considered more currently age appropriate. But explicit instruction is essential. So be ready to break it all down. You got to be really good at making your task analyses so you can teach the student how to engage in a variety of leisure activities and vocational activities. It's really important. Okay, with a vocational focus, your ecological assessment would be to identify potential work environments and sub-environments for your students and actually go to those spaces and spend some time, watch people working, see what goes on there. And that way you can determine what activities and skills are necessary for success in those environments. There is in your text a list of adaptive and I'm sorry, there's a list of some inventories and checklists. Basically, generally speaking, there are comprehensive lists of different adaptive and developmental behaviors and skills in a lot of different areas, including um, rec and leisure, vocational, that kind of things. These types of assessments help you determine which skills have been mastered, or if they've been partially mastered, or if they are something you really need to teach. Compare the skill deficits you find in these inventories, interviews, and checklists to the ecological assessments to help you prioritize what you will teach your student. The types of direct observation data collection that you could gather would be event recording. So you're taking, well, depending on what skill, right? You could be looking at how many bites a student takes before she spits one out when she's eating. You could be looking at how many times they begin brushing their teeth within 2 minutes of putting the toothpaste on the toothbrush. Number of times they begin work within 5 minutes of, you give like clock in or given the directive by the instructor. Number of bites of food they eat with a fork rather than with their hand. That's a way to, so the event recording is the tally mark, right? The number of times that they perform the skill. Sometimes you need to do that based on the number of opportunities. Sometimes you just need to collect the number of times. It depends on what you're looking for. Duration recording, again, it's that time span, right? How long does it take them to brush their teeth? How much time do they spend? What's the time span that they'll engage in a recreation task without prompting? Because maybe that's something you want to stretch, right? There's also the structured play approach where you create kind of work boxes, which I embedded a little video about that in the social skills module, where she created work boxes to show the student how to play with something, and then they know that they're done playing with it, and then they know what reinforcer is next. It sounds a little crazy, but That structured play approach is a way to just really really show them step by step, how do I play with this thing? Which, believe it or not, you have to teach a lot of our students. Now let's look at self-help skills. This is really, really important because it's critical to success, independence in any environment. Um, you're more your student will be more accepted in general if they are able to take care of things like toileting and dressing and eating, and if they don't have physical barriers to that, of course. So you really want to focus on those skills. If they don't have those skills, that is a priority to teach your student toileting, um, eating on their own, being able to dress themselves. Those are going to be key, because they happen all the time. They happen every day. And if they have to wait for somebody else to help them with that, um, it really, really obviously puts a damper on their overall independence. Ideally, you start this kind of instruction as early as possible. It's very age appropriate to be working on those skills in a preschool setting. So that's a great time to really, really make some leaps there. I know that many of our students, it takes them a lot longer than that to learn those skills, but that doesn't mean you stop. You want to make sure you have consistent plans in place. Things to consider when you're teaching self-help skills: you really want to work with the families. You want to collaborate on which skills you're teaching, and you want to make sure that you, like, if you created a task analysis for that skill, that they're using the same one at home, so you have consistency across those places. Or if you have a toileting schedule, um, try to carry that same schedule at home, especially, over the weekends and so on. You want to teach self-help skills in the natural contexts and times as much as possible. So rather than fabricating a time and space, sometimes you have to do that, but ideally you teach it in the typical times. So bathrooming would be more, toileting times hopefully would align with somewhat with break times for students in general. Um, Keep in mind, when you are dealing with very personal things like toileting, or when we have our older girls' menstruation, these teach, and that you may have to teach them how to appropriately take care of themselves hygiene wise. These are very private, obviously, skills that you will be teaching them. So they should be done in privacy. That shouldn't be a thing that you have a bunch of people in the room. As few folks as possible to keep the students safe, but also give them their privacy. You want to use effective ABA-based strategies to teach those skills. They've been found to be very effective in teaching daily living skills for students with autism. This is things like prompting, modeling, reinforcement procedures, shaping, chaining, self-monitoring, visual cueing, video modeling or video instruction. Those have all been really useful. Discrete trial training, milieu teaching, so that you're in that natural environment, right, and context. Again, that video modeling piece can be super helpful when you're working on these skills, because that's a way for them to review the steps over and over again, without you necessarily having to re-instruct. You may need to simplify tasks for teaching purposes. You may have to modify materials. If they can't, this is when we are really also considering AT, right? You may have to implement some AT to support the student in completing a self-help task independently. They might need, for example, if they struggle with putting their socks on, maybe you need to get socks that are a little bigger, or pants that are a little bigger, where they have a stretchy waistband to make it easier for them to pull on. And then you shape that behavior till it gets a closer approximation, till they build the skill up to complete the task on their own, with the most natural tool that would be in place in that environment. Again, your chapter goes into this in a lot more detail. So please, please, please make sure you're reading through that because it's really important. All right, let's talk toileting. Many children with autism may not show the typical signs that they're ready for toilet training. So we often see a delay in this process. In fact, because of maybe a lack of functional communication, there might be some challenging behaviors exhibited when you're trying to engage in that toilet training. Please do not use punishment for accidents. This is not this is not an appropriate way to help build those toileting skills. Instead, reinforce their appropriate toileting behavior and time periods with dry, clean pants. So you really need to be paying attention. Here again, you need to take some data. How long do they go before they have an accident? You want to look for patterns because if you can figure out, you can't go any longer than an hour before they have an accident, then that helps you determine when to take them to the toilet consistently. And you want to catch them before they have that accident because you want to be able to reinforce rather than try to punish when we go the other way. Teach under natural conditions as much as you can. Ideally, you have some regularly scheduled toileting times, again, that hopefully you can carry over into the home environment as well. You may, especially when you're first starting, this may have to be pretty frequent until you can get the student to understand that if she or he holds it and remains dry, then that's a better thing. They'll feel better. They'll get that positive reinforcement they're looking for, and then you can eventually shape that behavior to stretch that time period to a more what am I trying to say? Let's see. Something that is a little more consistent with what the time frame everyone else waits to go to the bathroom. Differentially reinforce desired toileting behaviors and use extinction for accidents. So again, you're not punishing those accidents. It's more like you're not providing praise. You're not providing a lot of attention either. You want to address the accident as far as help them change into their other clothes, but you're not going to give them positive reinforcement here, okay? You're also not going to give, any punishment. All right, if you're working on, your text also has a really cool data collection form, figure 8.1 for toilet training. Comes from Snell and Farlow, actually. So if you don't have a good data collection system for that, this shows a great example of how you can keep track. And you do want to keep track of this information so you can show progress because it might be minimal. So you want to keep pretty detailed data on that process. All right, eating skills. This is a great time to work with students on life skills because food is naturally a very, very primary reinforcer for most people. So there's a lot of great opportunities for not only teaching those skills that have to do with eating itself, but also social skills and communication, all of those things. There are a lot of different types of eating and eating related skills. There's table 8.5 in your text has a nice list that is broken down. What I really like about this chapter actually is that it does break down skills into the kind of early childhood range, that elementary school primary range, and then more of an adolescent range. So you can kind of see, it gives you ideas of skills that they should have that you could work on with your students. So take a close look at that. Make sure you're teaching socially valid eating skills and determine what socially valid criteria should be standard for those skills. And again, the ecological assessment will help you with that. Take a look around. What are the peers doing? Because you want to teach natural skills here. You can use task analysis to teach most eating skills using chaining, shaping, reinforcement. Physical and video prompting are also helpful practices here. You want to teach the skill in sequence from the most basic to the more complicated. Make sure you're teaching age appropriate skills. Use highly motivating foods to help with this process. And get peers without disabilities as peer buddies to help here. Again, remember that dyad we talked about in the last chapter. Ideally, you have kind of one peer working with one student, so that they can kind of concentrate on working with that individual. Milieu teaching is great for relevant vocabulary. So that is recommended. Picture or video prompts are helpful to cue students. So if there's kind of a procedure, you can create a laminated picture or put something on an iPad that they can follow. Make sure you work on reducing inappropriate or challenging behaviors. Refer back to chapter 3 to help you with that process. You want to complete meal times within a reasonable time. So obviously, you can't take all day, so you want to keep that in mind. And be thinking carefully about your picky eaters and how you can work on expanding maybe what they can eat and what they will eat by using some of those shaping procedures. And if necessary, create opportunities for natural contexts here, like family meal style eating. So you might have a party in your classroom where you all create a meal together and you have a family style eating time. That's not necessarily how they would typically eat at school, but it is a natural context for home and parties and that kind of thing. So you can practice that skill in the school environment as well. All right, dressing skills. You want to work with parents to figure out what is age and skill appropriate goal-wise for your students in this area. Again, use those effective ABA teaching techniques. You want to be thinking about current and future independence. So keep that in mind. Teach skills in context as much as possible. So dressing skills would be, after they're done during restroom times, that kind of thing. Remember that students need privacy. Teach appropriate vocabulary here using discrete trial training or milieu teaching. And you may need to modify clothing and fasteners to make dressing tasks easier. For example, if you've worked on shoe tying forever and ever, years and years and years, and it's just not working, then you can keep working on that, but encourage families to get slip-on shoes so that the student can get the shoe on him or herself. Maybe clothing has to be a little baggier so it's easier to put on, or there's a lot of use of elastic so that they don't have to do buttons or zippers. But think about what's a way we can dress our students that makes the process easier for them. Reinforce specific dressing tasks and appropriate pace, right? For students who take their clothes off at random times, I had a student like this too. Pay attention to signs for that. I knew he was going to start when he would kick off his shoes. That was his first step. If you did not address the issue right then, he would continue to take his clothes off until he was completely naked. So we had to obviously work on using an FBA and behavior plan, work on changing that behavior. But mostly it was an antecedent strategy. It was as soon as we saw that he kicked those shoes off, we'd step in, distract, derail, address the issue, because he was showing us, because he was nonverbal, he was showing us he was unhappy in some way. So we had to, and he wanted some attention. He wanted some attention from the teachers. So extinction did not work with this process. He would just continue to take off his clothes. We had to work on keeping our clothes on and reinforcing him for keeping those clothes on. Use actual clothing to teach skills. Don't just show pictures of things. That's not going to generalize to what they need to do. So use the real deal. Go to the thrift store if you need to and get some cheap items of clothing to practice. Get them bigger sizes so people can put them on over their clothes that they already have on. Those are some things to think about. And again, you want to work with home on this one so that what you're teaching is also reflected at home. Especially if you create checklists, picture-based checklists for the student, share those with parents. Get their feedback on that. Personal grooming and hygiene. This is really important, especially as if we want our students to obtain and maintain friendships, if we want them to obtain and maintain jobs, that grooming and hygiene comes into major play here. It's also important for their health and their overall independence that they're able to do this themselves. So this includes dental hygiene, feminine hygiene, overall physical cleanliness, and then the grooming of a person. The goal is for our students to do these tasks without assistance or reminders. So again, video modeling is great for this. Picture-based checklists are great for this, whether it's something they have out or something that you teach them how to use on an iPad or a phone. But ideally, they would be able to do, you can schedule reminders within the phone, that kind of thing, but you're trying to wean their dependence off another person. Pay attention to when grooming tasks are performed. And typically you want to teach using a task analysis and some chaining shaping procedures. You want to make sure you have a prompting technique or system in place and a reinforcement system in place so that you're prepared. You have a plan for fading out your prompting and reinforcement and turning that over to the student to complete independently. Again, table 8.7 has a nice little breakdown of skills that are typically performed by individuals at certain ages. So young children, elementary school children, adolescents, and what those different skills look like to help you sort of know what to focus on. All right, play, leisure, and recreation skills. Students with autism do frequently struggle to actually engage in play and recreational activities. There's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it may be that their behaviors have been challenging, so families didn't really want to engage them in those or take them out and involve them into those kinds of activities with others. Could be that they perseverate on certain, individualized tasks, so it's difficult to motivate them to participate in any of these other activities. But really keep in mind that it's important that our students learn how to get involved in these things in order to improve their social skills and to help them build relationships with others. Also, we know that for our overall health, being active is important. And so we want to focus on helping our students learn how to and find activities in these areas that they can enjoy. But generally, they're going to need some type of explicit instruction in how to engage in that activity, including probably a reinforcement procedure to help motivate them to participate. And the research has shown that increased appropriate play and leisure skills often helps decrease those maladaptive social behaviors, because they're now engaging in something that's reinforcing and fun for them, so they don't need to engage in those challenging behaviors. You're going to want to do that ecological assessment again, so you can figure out what skills your student's missing and what you need to work on. You want to definitely involve a preference survey here. Don't force a student to engage in an activity that you have no idea if they have any interest in. Try to gauge the choices, especially when you first start, that align with what they currently show interest in. And your text does a great job giving ideas here as well. Parent surveys, direct observations, these are great ways to figure out what students seem to kind of show interest in. You want to Oh, yeah, that's what I wanted to point out. Your text talks about a child who engages in a lot of self-stimming behaviors would maybe be a good activity or a good candidate for activities that involve a lot of sensation. So weightlifting or yoga or Taebo, ballet, swimming, gymnastics, where they're going to get a lot of physical feedback. If they like to touch a lot of different textures, maybe they'd be interested in finger painting or ceramics, making things with their hands, this might be a good opportunity for them. Someone who sniffs a lot, they love to smell things. Maybe they can make some potpourri or make perfume. Think about those kinds of things and how you can actually teach them an activity that goes along with and may meet the need of the self-stimulatory behavior, but people would see as more socially appropriate or socially valid. Okay. You also want to keep in mind what types of activities peers their age are engaging in and try to kind of guide them toward those activities. I had a friend who he taught at a middle school. He's a professor now, but what he did was he started a game club at his middle school. So video games. He got some funding, bought a few video game systems for his classroom, and then he would have game club once or twice a week after school, and anybody was welcome. Of course, this was a great opportunity to engage with peers, typical peers as well. But they would have, and he would focus on games that would have at least some social aspect to encourage those social skills. Okay, let's see. So how do we go about this? Things to think about when you're planning your instruction. Choose your target activity, figure out a system to guide the student through that activity. Figure out what types of visual cues are appropriate to guide them through that activity. Come up with an organizational structure to store that activity, some type of work box, activity box, that kind of thing. Teach the activity, use the prompting system and the organization system. This is a great time to embed discrete child training, milieu teaching. And then after the students learn the activity and use the activity boxes, you can start expanding that to other types of activities. All right, vocational skills. We could have a whole entire class on that, but we're just going to barely touch on it here. A lot of the same, instructional supports, instructional strategies apply here. So it is very related. Something to keep in mind, even if you're working with middle school students, later elementary school students, you can be working on those vocational soft skills that are really important, or following instructions. That's kind of a key vocational skill, right? They have to be able to follow a set of instructions. Well, you work on that all the time. You're working toward these vocational skills, this independence in a workplace. Because work is an essential component of most adult lives, it helps us obviously pay for things, but also the research shows that folks just find themselves happier with a job because they feel like they have a purpose. So that is a huge part of focusing on vocational skill development for our students. It helps our students become independent. They can see themselves and we can see them as contributing to society, helps them be part of a social network, helps them in making choices and decisions and building that self-determination. But currently the research is pretty dismal on unemployment and underemployment for individuals with autism, regardless of where they are on the spectrum. So it's really kind of disheartening. So there's a lot of work to do in this area, and you want to start that preparation when children are very, very young, especially when we talk about those social skills, those soft skills, because they deeply affect success in the vocational setting. Your text also points out that long-term vocational planning is required as part of an individualized transition plan, which students do begin really focusing on in that 14 to 16 age range, begin talking about that, and then continue through high school. But that doesn't mean, if you're working with young ones and elementary school students, that doesn't mean you're not thinking about this stuff, okay? Because that is our end goal here. Some curriculum to considerations would be that the tasks you work on are age appropriate and functional. The training you give should reflect jobs that parents and other IEP team members and the student feel are appropriate for that student and are available in the community. So a lot of times when we ask students what they want to do, they'll say something like, I want to play in the NFL, or I want to be an astronaut, and those are great, but also we want to, just like anyone else, those are hard jobs to get, so we want to have plans A, B, and C. Think and take a look at what's available in the community around them, especially if they're going to need a lot of family support as they age. Vocational goals and instruction should reflect the interests and the aptitudes of the student. That's why you're going to need to do a lot of preference and interest surveys. You're going to want to take a lot of data on their skills in different areas. And you want to be thinking about, you got to think creatively, because you might be able to actually carve a job for somebody or design an entrepreneurial type job for somebody. There are lots of things to do out there. Don't try to hold yourself to, or the student to very super defined category, or well, you're not going to be able to do this because you can't pass this test. Think instead, is there something related within that category that the student could certainly be successful, that you could be working toward. And the reason that ecological inventory is so important is that you want to think about and be aware of the possible barriers to employment for the student in those areas, or challenges surrounding maintaining that employment, because you want to start working on those barriers and coming up with either accommodations, modifications, assistive technology, or simply program for teaching them the skills they need to get past those. And this is consider teaching self-determination skills. Don't just consider this, folks. Teach self-determination skills. This is so important. It doesn't matter what level of disability the student has. You should be teaching self-determination skills. And if you are not familiar with what that means or looks like, I encourage you to look at programs like SDLMI, Self-Determination Learning. There's a lot of free actual materials. If you just look up SDLMI, really. And I'm not going to go fully into all the self-determination information right now, but there is definitely a lot out there, and you should be embedding that into your programs in general. Other instructional considerations, you're going to want to use direct instruction, reinforcement-based strategies, lots and lots of modeling. There are simulation-based training that has some kind of preliminary effectiveness. We're seeing a lot more like virtual reality or augmented reality training in social skills, in vocational skills. There's some pretty cool stuff out there. Again, video modeling is also very useful for vocational skills, just like it is for a lot of other skill areas. Or audio cueing. There have been like the bug in ear kind of job coaching things, especially these days when you can kind of wear a camera and you can have somebody like prompting you in your ear. Visual supports, creating, visual checklists, that kind of thing, to remind individuals what to do in each setting or for each job task. The use of antecedent and response prompts will be important. Performance feedback is essential. If you just let them carry on without knowing what they need to correct, then you're probably not going to see the student doing it correctly. And it is important, an important component of that generalization skill building to teach self-monitoring so that they can learn to evaluate themselves on their performance of the skill. Ultimately, our goal is that students obtain and maintain paid competitive employment in inclusive settings. That's the goal. We want them to get out into the world and be part of the community just like everybody else, with as little need for external supports as possible. However, we know that many of our students are going to need some level of support. So the next step is supported employment, which actually kind of covers a wide range of employment supports. They all typically involve a job coach of some kind. Vocational rehabilitation can help with this. In fact, that's pretty much their job. But so the main models that they're showing you here for supported employment include individual placement. So helping the student find and obtain a job in a certain setting. The job coach would work with them for a certain amount of time and try to, fade their supports there until the student or till the individual can work in that employment setting independently with maybe some check-ins. There are enclave programs where small groups of folks with disabilities might be kind of grouped together with a job coach that leads the group of them out into the world and works on things. Work crews are kind of similar. There are group placements. And then what we are definitely getting away from and what you may still see happening are sheltered workshops where they're facilities where people are putting together kind of assembly line type stuff. WIOA basically said no more to these. They shouldn't be happening because what we saw, is a well-meaning idea. But what happens is these companies essentially are allowed to pay sub-minimum wage, so like pennies per item. These individuals could be working all day long for hours all week long and getting paid $30, so it's really kind of like slave labor in a lot of ways. They don't typically get out of those programs, although they're supposed to be kind of just a training facility. What happens is those folks end up staying there. So we're trying to shift gears toward getting our individuals out into the community so they can grow and they can and the community can learn to work with them. And that's really a lot of it is informing the community, and folks in the community learn how to work with people that are different, and that it's not that bad. The other piece you could look at is that entrepreneurial model. So if there are a lot of other barriers to employment, perhaps the student has a skill that could very much be something they can or like talent that they can sell as their own business. So then you're going to be focusing on obviously helping to teach them how to run a business, that kind of thing, but using their specific strengths. These days, it's so easy to do that too. You have, online formats to sell things, Etsy, um, and ways to get it out there through Pinterest. There's tons of stuff. So it's a great time to engage in that kind of thing, even if it's not going to be enough money for them to, fully support themselves. At least it's a way for them to earn some money and to take some independence. All right. To summarize this chapter, teaching basic life skills is critical to success for students with autism because they generally don't learn these on their own, but they do need them to function as an independent adult. So we need to explicitly or directly teach. Ongoing systematic instruction will be necessary, and you'll have to repeat it. And that's why you want to set up systems like video modeling and picture-based checklists that they can remind themselves how to go through it on their own without you needing to be there every single time. But keep in mind, failure to achieve these skills will likely lead to more restrictive living and work environments, which is not what we want. View functional adult goals as guides for every teaching decision. So even at early start, you want to be thinking ahead to the future. Thanks for listening all, and I hope you enjoy the chapter and have a great day.